Hey, this is Dr. Ben Weitz, host of the Rational Wellness Podcast. I talk to the leading health and nutrition experts and researchers in the field to bring you the latest in cutting-edge health information. Subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast for weekly updates. And to learn more, check out my website, drweitz.com. Thanks for joining me, and let's jump into the podcast. Hello, Rational Wellness Podcasters. Very exciting today to be talking to one of my favorite guests, Dr. Christopher Shade, and today we'll be speaking about longevity. We will be speaking about how to delay the aging process, to reduce the likelihood of chronic diseases, and how to live longer and better. How do we take that aging curve where we see that aging for many is this long, slow decline in function and increasing onset of chronic diseases that starts in our 30s and 40s, and turn it into a big rectangle where we maintain a strong level of function for a long period of time and then quickly drop off. Today, we'll be talking about some of the key metabolic pathways and processes that have been identified to play a big role in aging, including AMPK, NRF2, Sirtuins, NAD+, Synalytics, as well as hormones and toxins. I recently heard David Sinclair, famed longevity researcher, saying on his podcast that these longevity survival pathways are like the Pentagon, which is where the coordinated defense of our country is organized. And we're trying to make a crank call to the Pentagon for them to send out the troops to defend the body, even though there's no immediate threat. That's what we're doing when we are taking nutraceuticals, using drugs off-label like metformin, peptides, practice intermittent fasting, cryotherapy, in order to stimulate these longevity pathways. Dr. Christopher Shade is the founder and CEO of Quicksilver Scientific, which has revolutionized the nutritional supplement industry with their innovative nanoparticles and liposomal delivery system. Their heavy metal testing and their detoxification protocols that have become the standard for many for reducing heavy metals and mycotoxins. Quicksilver now offers a new longevity line. I also want to say that after listening to this podcast, you can get 15% off your next order of products from Quicksilver Scientific by using the affiliate code WEITZ15. Chris, thank you so much for joining me again today.
Great to be here, Ben.
Good. So before we get into what we can do to live longer, what do you think is let's talk about what's the difference between chronological age and biological age, and then what's the best way to measure this?
Yeah, so, chronological age, we all know. I am 53 right now, but what's my biological age? And, there's a lot of ways that they go about measuring it. For a while, they were looking at different blood markers. And then what's grown to be kind of the norm is looking at methylation patterns on something called CPG islands in your DNA. And so these epigenetic clocks, like the original Horvath clock, have been used extensively. And it's funny, they say that they train the clock with people with, at a certain age, more or less function. And so they're taking people and they're relating IQ, grip strength, balance, facial aging, IQ, all to biological age versus the chronological age. There's also a new clock. So in fact, as we talk, we'll talk about a 40-person study where we put them through the paces of one of our systems to detoxify, raise AMPK, raise mitochondrial strength, and we're able to shift back the biological age in this cohort. And also there's a new one called the Dunedin Poem. Like, who names these things? But Dunedin, if you were from New Zealand, you'd be like, well, yeah, that's like called Miami Beach. Dunedin is this little beach town in the south of New Zealand, and they don't make Miami beaches there. They make Dunedins. And so they had calibrated this clock. It was between like Duke and these guys at the University of Otago and one other place, maybe Oxford. And And what they did is they worked on the pace of aging. So it's more of an instantaneous measurement of the pace of your aging, how fast these genes are shutting down over time. So time is this progressive loss of function, and if the loss of function happens faster than the chronological years, then you're aging at a rapid rate, and so your biological age may be 70 when you're 53. When the pace of aging is slow, then over the period of time of having a slow pace of aging, then you get to 53 and your biological age is 43. Or one of my friends and one of my doctors who prescribes for me, she's 54 and she registered a 30.
Really? Wow.
She uses everything, and so there's these measures, and what we're trying to do is extend our health span. And you brought it up, to run as fast as you can and then quickly end. I always talk about, remember the Blues Brothers? It's the Blues Mobile. The thing just drives like man, and it's cruising down the highway, and the cops are all crashing, trying to catch it. It gets to the final courthouse where it's supposed to stop. They close the doors, and it just falls into a pile of bolts, and it's all over. And so that's how I want it to be. And that's what we try to have a good health span.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So have the results of that study that you did with the biological clock, the study's been completed?
Yeah, it's been completed. We got the analysis back. We're using TrueAge Diagnostics, which is the go-to out there now.
Right. Yeah, I think I talked to Ryan Smith. He mentioned that you guys were doing a study.
Yeah. And so we finished that all up, and the results were great. We got very significant changes in the Horvath clock. We had very significant changes in the pace of aging. And we actually, in 3 months there, we beat the results from the calorie trial, which was a 2-month caloric restriction trial. That's the only thing shown to slow the pace of aging. And they pulled back 25% on their calories for 2 years. They changed the rate of aging, but they didn't change the absolute clock. And then looking into subsets, we found really strong changes in immune. And when you're looking at the genes that were differentially methylated, hypomethylated, or hypermethylated, a number of these were related to immune cells. So there's a significant change epigenetically in the monocytes, in the natural killer cells, and what was the other one? I got it here on the screen behind me. Coming on now. There it is. B cells. Yeah, natural killer and B cells were the most significant, and then monocytes after that. So it was really exciting. And, it was a 3-month program. The first month was a detox, but with AMPK activity to it, like say 70% NRF2, 30% AMPK. Second month, we kind of shift to like 70% AMPK, 30% NRF2, and a lot of NAD building and membrane building, sirtuin activation, getting the mitochondria really clear. So clear things out, detox, then build up metabolic strength, and then the last month, we kept going on that mitochondrial metabolic strength. And we got these great results. And as we talk about this more, we're going to see some of these things are hard to uncouple, like NRF2 and AMPK. You think they're separate, but they're so co-regulated. And then, AMPK and sirtuins, well, one is just a secondary level of the other. And a lot of this metabolic clarity, I'd like to call it cardiometabolic efficiency, begins at AMPK. And then if you have enough NAD, you encode that into sirtuins secondarily. So like mitochondrial biogenesis, you start with AMPK phosphorylation of this PGC1A promoter for mitochondrial biogenesis, but then you have to deacetylate it with sirtuins, which means you have to have enough NAD to do that, and then you get full activation of mitochondrial biogenesis, which makes more mitochondria per cell. So there are almost like these interwoven progressive layers of encoding this higher level metabolism.
That's interesting. You mentioned about the immune system function, and that's definitely one of the markers of aging is when we age, the immune system tends to have less and less function, which is why you see
senescence. Yeah,
exactly. And so I read the Fahey trial, in which they was the first trial that they were able to reverse aging, and they also looked at something called thymus involution, which means shrinking of the thymus gland, and they were able to reverse that as an indicator that the immune system is actually getting stronger rather than weaker, and that's super important. In fact, we just recently saw what happened during the pandemic to seniors who have a weaker immune system. They weren't able to fight off the virus as well.
Yep. Yeah, they were really wiped out. And it was like, I wish I could have done some of that thymus work. I mean, they were imaging them and stuff. We weren't really set for that. But I'd love to, go in deeper and reproduce some of these things, get better blood markers. One of the things we tried to do is get some of the blood markers, but they're so nascent right now.
You should talk to Vashtani about doing a lymphocyte map test, because that's the first test that actually maps out all the specific T cells.
Oh, so Eric has that.
Oh. Yeah, it just came out with it.
Oh, geez, that would be great. I'm going to give him a call.
Yeah. So let's get right to what do we need to do to slow the aging process and live longer? Why don't we start maybe with AMPK?
Yeah, well, we have this conceptualization of it that we call the longevity wheel, and it kind of looks like a Star of David. It's a 6-point wheel, and it's got like pop, 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 and these are these things that you can intervene in. And the top spoke of the wheel is AMPK NRF2, and that's what we're going to talk about. And just to fill in, then the next spoke is NAD+, the next is Sirtuins, the next is telomeres, the next is Synalytics or senescent cells, and then the neuroendocrine system. But why is NRF2 and AMPK at the top, and what are the two, and why do they go together? And so NRF2 we've talked about a lot. You and I have talked about. It's this master switch for chemoprotection, which when it's upregulated, well, first it's called a nuclear transcription factor. And that means that it's outside the nucleus and something triggers it to go into the nucleus. Sometimes they just hit signalers on the wall of the nucleus that go in, but the signal gets in and it stimulates transcription or upregulation of genes that go with some family. And for NRF2, that family is the chemoprotection family. So it's antioxidants, detoxification, protein regulation, like getting rid of unfolded protein, fixing damaged proteins. It's all cleanup stuff. And that's NRF2. We always talked about that because I was always, metal detox guy. So you got to raise NRF2 to bring up all the glutathione genes and get rid of toxins like heavy metals. And then we did a study, or actually Cheng Wan down in Houston, he's a functional medicine doc, did a study on our push-catch liver detox system where he found like 82% resolution of fatty liver in 1 to 2 months. Just really crazy. And you're like, wow, you move toxins out and that does that? Well, no, not exactly. That's part of moving toxins out. But even if you moved all the toxins out at once, that wouldn't totally happen. AMPK then is this triggers the AMP kinase, and it's triggered by certain things like running out of energy, and that would be fasting, carb restriction, exercise, and it also can be triggered by a bunch of nutraceuticals and pharmaceuticals such as metformin, berberine, resveratrol, quercetin. So when you trigger this, now remember, fasting, carb restriction, it triggers you to mobilize and efficiently use your own stored energy resources. So you're going to mobilize glycogen. You're going to increase actually glucose transporters, and you're going to lower insulin resistance, increase insulin sensitivity, and become a clean burning machine. And then you're going to reach into your fat. You're going to mobilize fat. You're going to turn it into ketones. This is how you go into ketosis. And you're going to use all that for clean energy. That's why these fasting and exercise get rid of the symptoms of metabolic disease and insulin resistance, things like that. So AMPK is part and parcel of that cleaning up. But you're going to your inner resources. You're using your inner glycogen, stored sugar, and fat. How are you going to use proteins? You get them through autophagy. So this is super, super important to both detoxification and longevity. Because what's autophagy but self-eating? You're taking whole cells, you're taking deposits. In fact, the burning of the fat out of the fatty liver is called lipophagy. So eating the stored lipids. If you're taking a old mitochondria that's damaged, you do mitophagy. You could be breaking down a Golgi apparatus, part of an endoplasmic reticulum. That's endoreticulophagy. And you're going to break all that down into its raw materials, and you're going to reuse it. And that includes amino acids and fatty acids, nucleic acids even, if you're taking whole cells. And so it's a recycling system. It's the inner detoxification for your broken inner part. So NRF2 is more taking away environmental toxins, and AMPK is more clearing out your own accumulations of waste. And that also includes unfolded proteins. When you're making proteins all the time, you don't make them right all the time, and you store the ones that aren't properly made in these vacuoles. And eventually, if you don't get rid of them, it's like taking the trash out of your house. Your house fills up with garbage. So NRF2 is this environmental cleanup, AMPK is this biological cleanup, and this raising yourself up to a higher metabolic efficiency.
This happens because the body senses there aren't enough amino acids around to make up the proteins they need. So that's why the body starts recycling these other pieces of the cells.
Yeah, essentially. Now, there's this switch that's intimately engaged in this, and this is mTOR, the mammalian target of rapamycin. So rapamycin was like the first cancer drug that was ever really good for you, and because it would block this thing called mTOR. So mTOR has a forward direction and a blocked. And the forward direction is anabolic, and it's pro-growth, and it builds mass, and it puts on mass. But we know if we just put on mass all the time, we're going to get sloppy and messy and dirty. I mean, even weightlifters put on mass, and then they cut it back down. All right? So if you're growing all the time, you're prone to cardiovascular stuff and cancer and stuff, and so you need a block to that. So when you block it, then you go inward and you recycle your own amino acids, you use your fats, you burn all that. So what drives it forward and what blocks it? So the things that drive it forward are insulin and branched chain amino acids. The branched chain amino acids are what goes back to you sensing that you don't have enough amino acids around, and you start recycling old parts. So when we're eating carbs and protein all the time, we're gaining mass. This is part of why keto was so therapeutic, where paleo, some people it worked and some people it didn't, because they took in so much protein, they didn't get as much of the mTOR blocking. But then we have things like intermittent fasting, and if we overlay some of these chemical triggers for it, like maybe you're using off-label metformin, or you're using something like our product AMPK Charge or Keto B46, and even of our liver sauce. That's why the liver sauce get rid of the fatty liver so well. Yeah, it was moving toxins and an NRF2 upregulator, but the quercetin, the luteolin, the milk thistle, those were all strong upregulators of AMPK. And so we can take these AMPK activators while we're intermittent fasting and get this flush of activity. In fact, we used to call the product Keto B46 because you can be keto by day and they need carbs at night, and then do it again the next day. So you're getting some of both worlds.
Think about this argument, because I was just talking to somebody about diabetes this morning, and she was advocating for not eating a lot of fat because some of the data indicates that saturated fat reduces insulin sensitivity.
You know, I think it's going to come down to what your blend of macros are, how much saturated, and are we talking about Crisco, or are we talking about beef tallow? Those are both saturated fats.
Right.
And some are very strongly pro-inflammatory, and some aren't. And then there's
there's a group of folks who are advocating. Some of them are advocating like a vegan diet, but they're kind of countering the lower carb diet, often advocated now for diabetics, saying no, if you eat a higher fat diet, it impedes insulin sensitivity.
I think it's going to come down to a couple of factors that they may not be looking at. Now, one of the subjects that's coming up really hot and heavy right now is uric acid. And you'll see Perlmutter's talking about,
yes.
Rick Johnson is one of the masters of that. We're going to have him here lecturing at our Colorado Functional Forum in April. And I'm actually roping him into helping me prove out some of the products that we're making for uric acid blocking. So then this is going to bring our AMPK discussion back to this switch. And you see in Perlmutter's book, Drop Acid, he talks about it as this primal switch. When your ATP goes low, you can go one of two ways. You can go the AMPK route or the AMPD route. AMPK goes in and mobilizes resources, cleans up, and gives you insulin sensitivity. It gets rid of resistance. AMPD goes exactly the opposite path. It's made to get you fat. AMPK is taking off fat. AMPD is gaining fat. It's breaking things down and it's breaking ATP down. Instead of regenerating it as in the AMPK pathway, you're burning more energy to regenerate your ATP. Here you burn off the AMP into xanthine, and then xanthine oxidase turns it into uric acid. Uric acid comes back around and blocks AMPK and keeps you stuck on the AMPD pathway. Now, the AMPD pathway generating all this uric acid, the uric acid is creating mitochondrial stress and creating free radical damage inside the mitochondria, and it's heavily associated with cardiovascular disease and, more importantly, early onset dementia. So if you're eating fat and other things that you're doing, like maybe you're eating high fat but not restricting carb enough, or you are prone to uric acid, maybe you need more polyphenols in your diet, you need more vegetables to block that path, or you're eating too much salt, you're drinking too much alcohol. The biggest culprit is just not having enough water. Keeps you always down that path. And so the fat then is going to become inflammatory fat instead of clean burn fat, which is over here. So I think one of the things, that I think I'm going to be advocating is that you got your uric acid meter, your ketone meter, and your sugar meter, and you're tuning yourself in so that you're going down the AMPK side.
Interesting. I was going down the AMPK rabbit hole this weekend, and I found one article that said that AMPK appears to reduce cancer risk by switching off cellular growth pathways.
Yes.
But if there is already cancer, the AMPK might be able to protect the cancer cells against stresses such as shortage of oxygen or oxidative stress.
Yeah, so that's, is it going to protect against apoptosis? So, it can keep you from going into, it can keep you from going into apoptosis and maybe help the survival mechanism. But realize that is the biggest freaking trap in the world. Cancer and fear of cancer is the biggest impediment to health, because every single thing that makes you live long makes cancer live long. Now, just shut the damn argument down for a second, then bring it back and say, what has cancer done that is genius? Cancer has immortalized itself. How does it immortalize itself? It upregulates glutathione. It upregulates NAD production. It upregulates growth hormone production. It controls AMPK and all these different pathways towards its longevity. And then everybody's like, well, what if I already have cancer? Then any of these things that help my longevity are going to help the longevity of my cancer. well, your cancer is going to show itself at some point, and then you're going to go after it. And it's a certain way that you go after it. But having a healthy AMPK is going to prevent you from ever getting it in the first place. And then being afraid of doing these things that promote longevity, in case there's some tumor somewhere in you, I don't know, go get a big scan or something, because it just becomes such a trap, don't you think?
Yeah, I'm sure. It's also, I'm sure, the balance and the double-edged sword of things.
Oh, hyaluronic acid. That's another thing that cancer has a lot of. And so all of a sudden, everything that immortalized cells have a lot of becomes a death trap. Yet that's all the stuff that makes you live longer. And so it's just, yeah, that may be technically true, but, I mean, nobody's saying that, when you're taking, berberine and quercetin and EGCD, right. I mean, there's people using those as therapeutics for cancer. And so, I don't think you're in any risk of, right. all of a sudden you're going to go off the deep end.
So what's the best way to stimulate the AMPK? What are the best strategies here?
Yeah, so I love intermittent fasting. I think it's a great thing. Some women it's a little bit hard, but get as much fasting as you can, and then work out fasted. Add in the AMPK activators. Now, here, as a broad brush, almost every plant chemical has AMPK activation activity to it, and including the adaptogens and all those, those plants that we love a lot of.
We want to take the ones that are going to be most efficient and take the right dosage.
Some of the really strong ones be berberine, resveratrol, quercetin. Quercetin's like such a multi-component for us, and NRF2, AMPK, Sirtuins. It's a senolytic. That's a really, really good one. And then things like milk thistle. Part of that is AMPK and Sirtuin activation of the liver. And a lot of these things that are AMPK activators are also Sirtuin activators. So there's this whole part of the, there's this whole grouping of things that are really good for your metabolism. So you take those when you're fasted, or at least don't have a lot of carb in you, and maybe get some exercise in. Ben Greenfield says the strongest AMPK activation are hits. He says you just 30 seconds as hard as you possibly can, and then I think he said 4 minutes of rest, and then 30 seconds as hard as you possibly can, and then 30 minutes of rest. But any way that you stack some sort of use, exercise, lack of carbs, and the AMPK activators together, you're going to get a lot out of that. And morning is naturally more AMPK than night is. We've just gone through the fasting. We've already got the fasting primed. And like in the skin, it's more breaking down. It's doing autophagy in the morning. And at night, you're sleeping and it's rebuilding everything. So I like to stack the AMPK activity into the morning and, build up at night. So, my carbs, those come at night, and, I intermittent fast in the morning. Lunch, hopefully it's, salad and some protein and still low carb, but that kind of varies a little bit depending on where I am. There'll be times where I'm literally cleaning up, and then times maybe I just had stem cells or exosomes and I'm a little more anabolic, and then, you'll go more in. But I think, understanding those two poles of the day, AM and PM, are naturally that way a little bit. And then the pendulum of your life. I'm trying to build a little bit. I'm trying to cut down and clean a little bit. And I definitely go into, times where I'm like, this baby's building up a little bit. And then I really start fasting hard. And it cleans up really quick.
Have you just mentioned exosomes and stem cells. Have you gotten into those?
Oh, yeah. I've done... I've gone offshore down to Colombia and done cord blood cells twice. I do exosomes every couple of months.
Which really exosomes do you do?
Which I use Chimera. I mean, there's not a lot of them out there. Chimera just shifted to doing only, cosmetic. FDA, that kind of window's closing a little bit in the FDA. Right. Yeah, and so my freezer is filling up with them. It's like until there's something else. There's a lot of movement in peptides too. Those are real good regenerative.
I think Claire was talking about he has some friends apparently who have a machine where they can manufacture their own peptides at their home.
What? That's great.
I don't know. I probably very wealthy friends, but
yes, very, very wealthy. Yeah. I have my peptide generator machine here. I got it used for $500,000 from Oxford University.
So let's talk about NAD plus, which is it's a signaling molecule that's present in the body for energy production, cellular energy, DNA repair.
Yeah, so NAD is awesome, and it's just the multiple levels at which this works are just crazy. And, there's so many levels, I don't even understand them all. But at its most basic level, it's going back and forth between NAD+, the oxidized form, and NADH, the reduced form. And it's doing that by oxidizing your inputs of energy. That would be carbs and lipids. It's taking the electrons away from them as your carbs make their way off to CO2, and at each little part of the citric acid cycle, or all these different breakdowns. It's NAD plus is taking two electrons, becoming NADH, and then it's going into the electron transport chain, and it's dropping the electrons into the high energy electron transport chain and leaving the proton there that's eventually going to be pumped across the membrane, form that proton gradient, and come back through ATP synthase and drive ATP formation. So it's shuttling energy from the sun, which is what built your carbs and your lipids, and bringing it in to make ATP. All right, so if it just did that, it would be a great molecule. But it does so much else. So then it's also the cofactor in sirtuins. So sirtuins are deacetylases, and acetyl groups are turning on or off different proteins. And there's sort of the good anti-aging things, and to turn them on, you deacetylate them. And then the bad anti-aging things, and to turn them on, you acetylate them. So when the acetyl groups are on, the sirtuin are a lot of the anti-aging things like FOXOs are off, and things like P53, which makes more senescence. And why would you even do this stuff? It's to stop cancer growth. So a lot of the slowing down and winding down of the body is to make sure that cancer doesn't take off and get on a run. And so the sirtuins are shifting you over to this cleaner building through this deacetylase activity. So we think about things like resveratrol and pterostilbene and quercetin as sirtuin activators, but actually NAD is the initial activator, and it fits right into this hole in the sirtuin and activates it. And then there's another hole where the sirtuin activating compounds, you'll see Sinclair call them stacks, STACs. They fit into another part in the molecule and hyperactivate it and get it super wound up. So NAD is the essential for having these sirtuins go on. And then it's also essential for gene repair. So as we get older, we're having assaults on our genes all the time. And say, I get exposed to some radiation and it damages a gene. There's something called a PARP that's going to go in and try to fix it. And it has to use the energy of NAD to fix it. And so it's sucking anything that damages your genes, sucks a ton of NAD in there. Now, what's that going to do? It's going to take the NAD away from the mitochondria, so the mitochondria can't complete the electron transport chain, and you're lowering energy. It's going to take things away from sirtuins, so then the sirtuins aren't going to be deacetylating the good genes, and so it's sucking all this repair over there. There's also CD38s. One of the good things that they do is seal up tight junctions when you're getting leaky gut, or leaky blood-brain barrier, or leaky liver. And so that's sucking NAD into that activity too. And so there's this whole, and then there's some other ones that I don't understand as much into how it's deciding which genes are turned on and off. So this epigenetic regulation of the epigenome, what we can turn on, what we can turn off. And it's basically, do we have NAD to spare? We're going to turn on the good. Do we not? We're going to just hold hold our own. We're going to hold the fort down and make sure we're at just default functioning. And when we're in default functioning too long, there's a lot of theories of cancer emerging from in that default functioning, this explosion of this overgrowth. So NAD is doing all these things throughout every organ, and you can relate NAD deficiencies to eye disease, liver disease. I mean, what you waste out your NAD, fatty liver is like the first thing that you get. Heart disease, every different organ. So NAD is really, really a powerhouse for driving the whole body and then driving what are the expressions of your genome. Remember, this is like the consciousness of the body is deciding. You have multiple pathways, multiple possibilities for your consciousness to choose from in your physiological outcomes. And NAD is right in that decision tree of what's possible and what's not possible.
And the way to promote NAD is to take one of the precursors like nicotinamide riboside or NMN.
Yeah.
And there seems to be two camps in debates as to which one is more effective.
Yeah, well, that's just basically because humans like to be on this camp or the other camp. Nobody, you're a freaking liberal or you're a freaking conservative, It's like, and you're demonized either way. It's just, are you NR or NMN? And you look, like, where did all this stuff come from? It comes from Sinclair. So, and then he's loath to hear this, but his advisor, Leonard Guarente, and him had a little rift. And so Guarente is all about pterostilbene and NR, and has an MLM product doing that. And Sinclair's all about resveratrol and NMN and has various patents and shit on that. So they have this little war, like, which one is better? They're both good, and really you want both of them probably in a product, but you can never get a license to get both of them because there's intellectual property around it. So we have a liposome of NMN. I made a liposome for Chromadex of NR. It was freaking great, but they didn't want it. And so I can't do that, and so I just do the NMN. But in a liposome, it's freaking great, So the camp thing is kind of silly there. But let's get back to, how you build NAD. And where does NAD come from normally? So NAD, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. Right. So this is the high level of B3. And kind of like you look at like the story of the B vitamins, there's the decrepit, degenerate B9 folic acid. Everybody hates it. It does nothing but lay waste to the universe. And then there's the glorious 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, and then some of these kind of half losers in between like folinic acid. So it's the same game. B3 works its way up to the glory of NAD. And right before that, your NMN, and right before that, your NR. And so that's where all this sequence is. But as we get old, it's hard to take the degenerate vitamins and make them into the glory. You're just not as good of it. But then you think, like, if NAD runs everything in your body, what are you going to do if you don't have some food? You're a hunter-gatherer and there's nothing with niacin in it. Well, you can make it from the de novo pathway where you make it from tryptophan. And if you can't eat any tryptophan, you just recycle some of your cells, spit out some tryptophan, and you take it through a bunch of pathways. It just takes longer and takes more energy. And the enzymes to get up that last jump, it's actually the jump up to NMN, is that one gets knocked out by inflammation, knocked out by being old, anything that makes you sick makes that doesn't work. And so coming in with NMN and NR are the best ways to instantly get you up to that NAD. But then what people always miss is the balance with methylation. So NAD, all right, great, it's going to activate a sirtuin, killer. What's formed from that? It breaks down and all those high phosphate bonds are broken, energy goes into the system, and you're left with nicotinamide. Remember, that's the non-flushing niacin. Well, nicotinamide blocks sirtuins. And so you can't build up this pool of nicotinamide. You need to drive it back up into NAD. But if you're having a hard time doing that, then you're blocking all your sirtuins. So you got this circle called the salvage pathway, and it's going down here and getting stuck. So what happens then? You pee it out. But to pee it out, you have to make it into methyl nicotinamide. Where do you get the methyl group? SAMe. So SAMe methylates nicotinamide, you pee it away. You come in with a fresh NAM or NMN or NR, and you keep driving this cycle, but it's, you're bringing constant input out and leaving stuff out the back. And in doing that, you're depleting your SAMe and creating SAH, which creates then homocysteine. So if you keep driving that, you're going to build up homocysteine and deplete SAMe. And then what does homocysteine do? That gives you cardiovascular disease, and you have lowered methylation, and then you're depressed and you're inflamed and all this shit. And so then you got to stimulate both the methionine cycle, which is going to regenerate methionine from homocysteine, and that's interlaced with the folate cycle. So you want to stimulate MTHFR, which you do with B2, and you want to stimulate the methionine regeneration. So basically your cofactors you need B2, you need B12, and TMG. And the Pauper's pathway to get there is just lots of TMG. So if you're going to drive NR or NMN, you've got to support methylation so those two are balanced.
We've been having a fascinating discussion, but I'd like to take a minute to tell you about one of our sponsors for today's podcast. Are you ready to uplevel your health? Check out the longevity products from Quicksilver Scientific. They've been making premium nanoparticle delivery supplements since 2006, and they have a great suite of age optimization products, including metabolic activators, NAD+, and adaptogenic blends, as well as hormone support, to name a few. You don't have to look any further for comprehensive age optimization supplements with amazing bioavailability and absorption capabilities. To get 15% off your next order of Quicksilver Scientific products, please use the affiliate code WEITZ15. That's my last name, WEITZ 15 at checkout. And now let's get back to the discussion. It's interesting that you were talking about acetylation, and there's so much focus on epigenetics as being all about methylation. And I wonder if we just haven't gotten to the research on acetylation and some of these other pathways.
That's histone acetylation. So there's methylation and histone acetylation. Those are the two main epigenetic factors. And that's actually probably how NAD controls so much of the epigenome. But it's the methylation over time is the thing that is constantly increasing, and that's the thing that you can do the clock with. They don't have a clock with histone acetylation, and so they just ignore it, and everything's about methylation. We all run to one side, and some people are worried, oh my God, if I take too much methylation supplements, I'm going to methylate all my genome. And Kara Fitzgerald's work, she's a little worried about that. But there's all this balance, and that's great. I'm glad that you pointed that out, because why aren't we talking about that side of the whole deal?
Right.
Because if you look up epigenetics, those are the two fundamental ways that you turn on and turn off different gene sets. And it's important sometimes to shut things off and sometimes to open them up. And when you've got the balance and you're allowing both sides and allowing the enzymes to control all that, then everything's going to be great.
Well, what do you think? So in terms of sirtuins, what do you just mentioned resveratrol, you mentioned pterostilbene, there's something called fisetin. What do you think about some of those different ways of stimulating sirtuins?
I think they're all good as long as you're feeding in enough NAD. So resveratrol versus pterostilbene, I think they're fundamentally identical. Pterostilbene has better data going through the gut because it's got better absorption, but at a cellular level, I don't think it's any better. We're going with nanoemulsions. I don't really think it matters. We have a product coming out with both of them in it. Till now, we've been using mostly resveratrol because pterostilbene was so overpriced, but now it got better, so now we're using both. Quercetin, I guess fisetin does it too, but fisetin's also a Synalytics. So then we're going to talk about Synalytics as well. But there's, all these these things raise sirtuin activity, but if you don't have enough NAD, here's where, there's some conflicting data about resveratrol. And resveratrol they tried to make that into a drug, and they ran into phase 2 trials where some people were getting screwed up by it. Now, they were taking massive doses and trying to drive everything with that. They weren't even thinking about supporting NAD. So here's what happens. So I said that essentially
by the way, is this kind of where I remember years ago, Sinclair was this guy who had, his big thing was, we know that that caloric restriction seems to have this longevity benefit, but who really wants to live like that, eating 30 or 40% of your calories, less than you should, and then the worst tragedy would be like live that way like Royal Walford did and suffer and have this miserable life and then die of ALS in your 70s anyway. But but I remember.
and so we're trying to get to, all right, so he's like, well, then we're just going to pump the resveratrol in because, like Walter Longo, he's like points to these people who live to, 105, 110 in the mountains, and they're like 4'5". They've never smoked a pack of cigarettes. They had sex in once in their life for procreation, and they don't drink, and they eat like a thimble full of food every day. It's like, well, that's not how I want to live, And so how do we? This is the grail. How do we get all this right? And, true to anybody out of academia, let's do a one-hit wonder, and, cut to the chase. It's going to take a couple of things all in balance. So he tried to just run it on resveratrol in the beginning. And then they had some studies that were like, I don't think this is working. And here's what happens. If you don't have enough, remember I said the sirtuin to get activated has a place for NAD, which is the primary space. It's necessary. And then it has a secondary space for a sirtuin activating compound. Well, it turns out if you just jam in tons of sirtuin activating compounds, it almost sucks the NAD in like a magnet. What does it do? It takes it away from the mitochondria. And so then the mitochondria start misfiring. So you have all these sirtuins activating and you have mitochondrial dysfunction. You can't drive it with one. If you want to drive the sirtuin activating compounds, you need to supply enough substrate to have NAD balancing it. And then if you're going to do that, you need enough methylation factors to balance that. But that's not that complex of an equation. But if you try to just press one of the damn buttons, it doesn't work so well.
Right. Yeah, I think to this day, Sinclair takes a gram of resveratrol a day.
Yeah, he does. And he takes like a gram of NMN,
right.
And he probably takes a multi. And so he's got it all sort of held up there. But in the beginning, they tried to do it just with the resveratrol. And notice that was where all his work started. The last couple of years, he's been all NAD. So he must have been like, what am I missing here? And then he got all into NAD.
Yeah, I kind of remember there was a point at which, he was the guy who was going to solve this longevity problem. And then there was a point at which it's like, that's it. That didn't work. Forget it,
Yeah, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just what did we have to balance with that?
Right.
I had this great paper I found that was like, it was like biochemical archaeology. And they were talking about the balance between NAD and methylation. And they were talking about these different societies that grew up and, which ones thrived and how the balance of methylation and NAD gave them this power. And they were describing, like, if you're low NAD to begin with, you're not going to get anywhere. But if you're high enough NAD to get somewhere, then later in life, if you're imbalanced one way or the other, you get Parkinson's either way. But there are different Parkinsons. So there's the high NAD, low methylation Parkinson's, and the high methylation, low NAD Parkinson's. And then there's the balance. And when you balance the two, you raise the whole human potential up. I mean, that's beautiful.
That's beautiful.
And it, the language, spreading fields of proteinopathies, which are, uncoupling, electron flow from proton flow, and spreading fields of proteinopathies leading to the metabolic diseases and degenerative diseases of cancer and neurodegenerative problems. Yeah, exactly. Balance that thing, raise them both up, and just hit hard.
Well, let's talk about Synalytics and senescent cells are they're called zombie cells because they don't function the way they're supposed to.
Yeah, so the senescent cell, now it's usually it's a mitochondrial dysfunction or a toxic insult that causes telomere attrition that then progresses to mitochondrial dysfunction. And then the mitochondria start releasing these pro-inflammatory mediators that diffuse out through the cell. The cell stops, it goes into growth cycle arrest, stops reproducing, and it just sits there. And it releases pro-inflammatory mediators, which are spreading, decaying inflammatory fields throughout the body, but they're also recruiting other cells into this decaying inflammatory field. And that's one of the major causes of the propagation of all that inflammation that shrivels us up and makes us old and decrepit. And so the idea is to get rid of these cells. And so there's two ways. You can reverse them and put them back into growth again and have them repair their mitochondria. And that's if they haven't gotten too deep in. And that's by having good NRF2 and AMPK activity that restores the milieu inside the cell, restores the redox potential down to highly reduced, and it can come back on and reboot. And the other is to kill it, and that's senolytics. Senescent cell lysis is cutter. So senolytics, quercetin was the archetypal senolytic. Fisetin or fisetin came on as a really good one as well, but even things like resveratrol and terastillabine and curcumin have some of this senolytic activity. Now, measuring this is really a bit of a challenge. This is because when you come in with this, well, first you're measuring some of the cytokines, the inflammatory molecules that are coming out of these cells. But if you go in and cut a bunch open and kill them, there's a burst of senolytic cytokines that come into the system. So the senescent marker actually goes way up when you're addressing the whole thing. And then how long does it take to come down? So in our 3-month trial, it went up. And we were using tons of senolytics. There was quercetin in everything that we gave them. And but we got the good we got the good shift in the genes. We just have to come up with more markers around that. But some of the trials that have been used with really high end design senolytics have really been able to reverse phenotypic aging in a lot of animals and in humans. So that's a really exciting thing. And there's a really cool question in there, like, why the hell would you ever do that? Why would your cell ever do that? Well, one thing is for cancer surveillance. So, oh my God, I don't want to grow like mad into cancer. I'm just going to shut down the cell. All right, so P53s do that, but then they don't know how to get it out of there. So then there's acute versus chronic. Acute senescence, say I boom, ow, I just hit the edge of that desk there. I just broke a bunch of tissue in there, all right? So now there's a bunch of cells in there that are gonna go into senescence, and they're gonna sing the song of senescence really loudly, all in concert. So it's not just like whispers of senescence. It's like whop, whop, whop. And the immune system is going to hear the signal. It's going to come in. It's going to eat them. And so you can grow new tissue there. So that's a programmed senescence to rebuild damaged tissue. But when they're spread all over the place, it's just whispers, and the sound of inflammation may be loud, but the immune system can't pinpoint where it came from. And so it's not going in to clean up the mess. And so that's just one of the side effects of aging. And so now we know that we can go in and clean out some of those cells and stop that inflammaging signal.
And I guess there's another compound now called spermidine that's getting some play.
Yeah, spermidine, isolated from sperm, hence the name spermidine. You're like, well, they must have got it from sperm whales. No, they got it from sperm semen, and there's a lot of spermidine in semen. And
apparently they can get it from wheat germ and all these other vegetable products too.
Well, that's where they first got it. I mean, right, they're not lining guys up.
Right, that's where the name came from. Yeah,
that's where the name came from. Dr. Ruth Westheimer, remember the sexologist? She say, oh, there's so much good things for you in sperm. Little Austrian voice. But apparently she had the goods on spermidine.
It's not as good for marketing, though,
No. Every time I'm about to put in a product, I'm like, God, I'm going to have to listen to all this shit about this. and it costs a fortune. But Spermidine is really good for working on autophagy and mitophagy and senolytic activity. And so I'm sort of sifting through all the exact uses of that, but that's looking like that's going to be a really promising one.
Now, what about dosage? You read these studies and they say you have to have 250 milligrams of resveratrol, and your products, because they're liposomal, have a lower dosage of a lot of these products. How do we know that's the right dosage?
Yeah, like our quercetin, it's a 25-fold increase in absorption, and so, there's only 20 milligrams of quercetin. I'm like, yeah, multiply that by 25. That's a lot of quercetin. And the beauty of it is it goes right into the blood, and the levels in the blood, even at the 20 milligram level, you're going to beat out 500 milligrams because it all goes in at once. It gets a peak dose in there. Like you think of a senolytic, it's almost like chemotherapeutic. You need a peak dose to activate that. NRF2, AMPK, peak doses activate that. So it's a beautiful way to do it. Now, exactly what the right dose is, even though, you need 250 milligrams, this study, we're still really working that out. I know that the dosage schedule that we laid out in our BioAge reversal works because I was able to shift the whole genome clock back, so I know that's working. I know that I saw the markers of the senolytic activity go up, that I was breaking down these cells. But it's going to be a few more years of really, getting the right assays, working out what we really want to see to know exactly what it is. But, I have people go on these little campaigns, we're going to detox for a while, and, maybe we're taking, 40 milligrams a day, 50 milligrams a day. I'm stacking a couple of things together, and there you're actually getting, maybe a few hundred milligrams a day in these nanoforms. And I know that we're triggering it. I know we shift fatty liver. I know we're upregulating NRF2. I know we're shifting the genome. So I know that these dosages are working, but will we get to more specific dosages, more clarity to them? Yeah, we definitely will. But I also did do sirtuin upregulation tests on people using peripheral blood mononuclear cells. So the white blood cells are the only blood cells that are really cells. Red blood cells, they don't have a nucleus, they don't have mitochondria. They're not cells, they're just oxygen transporters. So you do it in whites, and we did. This is really nice. We saw in a single dose of, it was basically like our AMPK charge, but it was a little bit different. It's a product we're going to come out soon. Single dose over about 2-3 hours. The sirtuins upregulated about 3-4-fold, and they lasted 24 hours. So it was really nice because, I like people to do these things in spurts and then take a couple of days off, go a couple of days, take a few days off because you're stimulating the system, let it come back down. Stimulate it, let it come back down. So the way that we're using these and we're dosing them, we see the signals, we see the changes, we know we're working well on them, but I want to get to a point where I'm like, this dose for that dose for that dose for that.
I also have a request. Is there a way that you could put your products in a capsule form as well as an alternative to some of the liquids?
Yeah, and we did start doing that. They're called SED systems, self-emulsifying delivery systems. And so our CBD-PN is that way. Microbe Manager, which is more for, controlling microbial growth. But we are doing one that's a sirtuin activator in a capsule. And there's more of that capsule activity to come. In fact, maybe as we work out some of the senescent stuff, maybe we'll do a senolytic in there as well.
Yeah, that would be great because, some people prefer the liquids. Other people, they don't like the taste, and you have to go to the fridge all the time, and so they don't travel as well and stuff.
Yeah. So we are doing that.
Cool. Excellent. So any final thoughts and
No, we did good. We covered a lot of stuff.
We did.
And the only other thing we didn't really talk about is membrane health. And the membranes are, we're talking about phosphatidylcholine bilayers that are housing the cell, ones that are making up the mitochondria, ones are making up the endoplasmic reticulum. Everybody loves the mitochondria, but the endoplasmic reticulum is this big, huge, folded over, just layer and layer and layer and layer and layer of membrane that are creating what are called a membrane potential, which is a power potential it's a charge potential across the membrane that actually drives a number of the reactions or the little motors like ATP synthase that are in the membranes. And then the membranous organelles all communicate one to another. And the quarterback of that is the endoplasmic reticulum. And they actually exchange signals and discuss between the mitochondria, the Golgi apparatus, the endoplasmic reticulum, with signals coming from the extracellular environment through the cellular membrane, all that decision making going into the nucleus and signaling which genes to be manifest within the nucleus depending on the availability of inputs in the extracellular compartments and the health of the intracellular compartment. So it's a really beautiful communication structure, and building membranes with phospholipids like phosphatidylcholine is one of the best ways to build the health of the membranes. And that was my one fun thing when I went on a retreat with Joe Mercola, Ben Greenfield, Robert Slovak, Emily Givler, Bob Miller, and a couple other people. Joe brought his bioimpedance meter that was for measuring membrane health, and he measured everybody there, and then I was the last one to get there, and Emily was like, Chris is going to win, and Joe's like, why? She's like, membranes, PC, he's the PC guy. And of course I beat everybody. And I had these great numbers there because everything that I take has phosphatidylcholine, and you can buy it directly. You can buy our pure PC or our membrane mend or, various ways to get PC, but building the membrane is the one thing. And that was like in Europe, that was the first mitochondrial therapy was lipid replacement therapy. There was those old injectables, lipostabile and capsules of PC. And so the membrane is a big modulator of the power of the system. So we've been talking about cleaning up, burning cleanly, powering up the system, the NAD, the Sirtuins, getting rid of the senescent cells, and just having a high-powered system, and the transducer of the power, or the capacitor of the power being the membrane.
So the main ways to stimulate the membrane is with phosphatidylcholine, fish oil, what else?
Yeah, those good fats there. Those are kind of the core. But, where else can you get PC? So you can get it from lecithin, but don't get like cheap soy lecithin, even cheap sunflower lecithin. Go for the professional grades. We have it down into a nanoform in the pure PC and the astaxanthin. And then these really good carotenoids for protecting the membranes. And that would be like astaxanthin, zeaxanthin, lycopene, tocotrienol. Those are super good. And then other natural source, if you like, when I first started into this and was watching a lot of Dietrich Klinghart, egg yolk, organic egg yolks, 6 of those give you a massive PC dose.
Interesting. There's some cardiovascular literature to say that choline can raise your TMAO levels, and that can be problematic depending upon your microbiome.
Yeah, it's all backward. Your microbiome turns choline into TMAO, but the TMAO isn't actually what's causing the cardiovascular disease. What gives you the biggest spike of TMAO of any food in our biosphere? Do you know?
Salmon.
Yeah, fish. Fish are all at the top.
Yeah.
And those are the heart healthy ones.
Right.
So the thing is, the heavy meat eaters get a microbiome that makes TMAO, but they make a whole lot of other things. And, that Firmicutes, Bacteroides blend goes in the wrong direction when you're not eating enough plant matter. And there's all these other things that happen that move towards the inflammation of the cardiovascular disease. TMAO is just a side player in that. I don't believe it's driving it at all.
Right.
In fact, there was a after that paper came out, there was a bunch of Swedes, I think, wrote a big response to it called Something Fishy About TMAO.
Right. Yeah, it's never made any sense to me, but it is out there. So supporting membranes. And then you also talk about the importance of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Yeah, and then that's coordinating mitochondrial health. That's coordinating all of your hormone health. And we can do hormone replacement, but adaptogens are probably the best way to just make sure that all of that is working really well, whether you're taking exogenous hormones or not. One of the things that's cool about ginseng is it raises the receptor density for androgens and estrogens. So as we get old, our androgens and estrogens are going down. But if our hormone density goes up, or our hormone receptor density goes up, the activity, the androgenicity, is a interaction between the hormone level and the receptor density. So if you double your receptor density, you double the reactivity to a given level of hormones. And that's one of the beauties of the adaptogens. And in fact, the adaptogens, all the good ones, the astragalosides, the ginsenosides, the withanides, which are from ashwagandha, gypenicides from gynostema, all of them have the same steroid backbone of your hormones. So they're obviously meant to be interacting with your hormone system and affecting receptor sites, and that's why they work so good on that.
Yeah, I wanted to mention the astragalus situation because I know there's that TA65 supplement out there, which is this, I guess, specialized form of astragalus. Yep. But can we get that from other forms of astragalus?
Yeah. So theirs is cycloestragonol. Now there may or may not be other. That's what's come out. There was a Freedom of Information Act request to get the formula there, and it was cycloestragonol. Now, there may be some synergistic factor in there, but cycloestragonol is the core. So in our Longevity Elite, we have all these ginsenosides, and we have special astragalosides. We have cycloestragonol and astragaloside 4. And astragaloside 4 upregulates clotho, which is a regenerative molecule you make in kidneys and brain. The cycloestragonol works for telomerase activation to lengthen telomeres. But one of the things, Dr. Raffaele has been working with TA65 a lot, and he thinks that C-cyclo is also a killer senolytic. And he thinks that a lot of the senolytic activity is responsible for the regenerative capacity of TA and the astragaloside. So now, they used to have the market cornered. Now there's other ways to find cycloestragonol and astragaloside 4. But, whether it's working at a telomere level, a senolytic level, or both, seems to be good. Doesn't seem to be good. It's freaking great.
It's interesting how, hormones started out to be kind of like one of the first places a lot of doctors and researchers went for longevity because, they send signals to the body that things are good, that things are strong, to build, to get stronger. Yeah. We know people get older, they get weaker, they can't function. And now it seems like all we're hearing is that anything that tells the body that things are okay is not good for longevity, and all these pathways that tell the body that we're lacking, that we don't have enough, is where we need to go. But somehow I think there's got to be a balance.
It's a balance of the two. Yeah. There is no doubt at all that hormones are increasing your health span, if not your total longevity. I mean, that's just, to say that they will wipe the slate clean. Most of these things that helping longevity are hormetic, and they're little stressors, and you respond and clean things up. And you can overlay those on top of the hormone signals, and they're not going to, cancel each other out.
And both is where you want. Let's consider that Fahey, which we mentioned, published the first study to improve biological aging. He used DHEA and growth hormone in his.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. And growth hormone is absolutely correlated with decay. And, there's so many guys who do test and growth hormone, and it's like, God, I feel freaking great, and that is regenerative. And so these other things are cleaning up. And so you come in, you have a little NRF2 activity, and you have some AMPK activity, some sirtuin, that's taking out the trash. But, the power is coming through, the HP everything system.
Great. Another awesome discussion, Chris.
Yeah, it's been a great one.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this. I think we hit a lot of interesting science.
Yep. All right.
Okay, well, thank you, and I'll talk to you soon.
Take care, Ben.
Thank you for making it all the way through this episode of the Rational Wellness Podcast. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star ratings and review. That way, more people will be able to find this Rational Wellness Podcast when they're searching for health podcasts. And I wanted to let everybody know that I do now have a few openings for new nutritional consultations for patients at my Santa Monica Weitz Sports Chiropractic and Nutrition Clinic. So if you're interested, please call my office, 310-395-3111, and sign up for one of the few remaining slots for a comprehensive nutritional consultation with Dr. Ben Weitz. Thank you, and see you next week.